Welcome to another CEO Wisdom podcast. We have Chicke Fitzgerald with us today. She's transforming travel into a force for good. She's the CEO and founder and chief rainmaker at Solutions, located in the Tampa area. They basically empower clients to innovate, diversify their revenue through their revenue multiplier program. It's quite interesting. She also has a podcast for 30 years. Apparently, that's quite a long time. The Game Changer Network, it's called. She's the founder of that. She's a partner at a bunch of business, was the founder at the Sounding Board and so forth. TED Talks and an author, I believe. So very successful and diverse entrepreneur right there. This podcast is brought to you by podpair.com. If you would like help to start your own podcast, we help you do so with AI, help you generate lead sponsors and AdSense revenue. So we have a free ebook and masterclass on our website, podpair.com. Chicke, welcome to the pod. Welcome. And tell us a bit more about yourself. What you're up to nowadays.
Well, I am working on my 13th and hopefully the last of my startups. I started my career really as an intrapreneur before that term existed. What that meant was no matter what my job was in corporate life, whenever there was a problem, they would pull me into the room and somehow that would become my project. And so I did a couple of startups that way where I raised money internally from, the first one was with American Airlines when I was with the Sabre group and raised $5 million to build out the first automated expense reporting system back in 1984. So I've been doing this a long time, Charles. So I'm on lucky number 13. And as you mentioned, we are focused on the travel industry, on travel technology, and also event technology.
Right. Let's start earlier in your career. You worked at various companies. You were in corporate. How did you first got into travel?
Well, I had been on a trip with my parents the summer of 1976. And that summer when I came back, I got a job at a travel agency, and I had gone to an employment agency, not realizing that college dropouts shouldn't do that. And I had dropped out of college after one semester and started working in the travel agency, working on the bookkeeping side of things, so the back office. And very quickly realized I needed to learn the front office and how things worked. And this was the very first year that travel agencies were automated with booking systems. And just to put it in perspective, Charles, back then, there were no such thing as 800 numbers. There were no such thing as consumer credit cards. And so it was a very, very different world. I did the bookkeeping with carbon paper. It was called double entry bookkeeping. And so I went from that to working for a company that sold automated accounting systems, and then ended up working for a company based here in Tampa, Florida, that was actually, I didn't realize it after my 8 weeks in training, found out that they had just been bought by American Airlines. So I became an American Airlines Sabre employee quite by accident, but it was a great accident.
Right. And what was your first company and why did you get into entrepreneurship?
Well, as I said, I really started building companies from inside these other big companies. So again, my first startup was inside of the Sabre organization, raised $5 million internally, built an organization and built technology, built the entire team, had a team of about 100 people within American, and then did the same thing at Worldspan, which was my next company. They're now called Travelport, but they were a competitor of Sabre, and they were owned by Delta Northwest and TWA. And the funny thing about all of that was they were the companies that were the foundational technology for online travel. Sabre spawned Travelocity, Worldspan spawned Orbitz, Priceline, and Expedia. And so I learned really at the feet of the masters. So it was quite natural for me in the mid 90s to take a look at just going out on my own. And I did. And I started consulting, doing the same kinds of projects I did. So I was a pure strategic consultant for about 10 years.
Right. And your first startup, was it VEO?
Oh, no, you're looking at my LinkedIn. My LinkedIn lists all of my companies that I had as clients during the time of my consulting. So Solutions, the consulting firm, was my first company that I owned on my own after I left corporate life.
Right. And your first startup, like what was it about? You listed 13 today. What was the first one and what did it lead to?
Well, my first one, again, was working for one of my consulting companies, Carlson Companies, that was the number 2 travel company in North America. And we built an organization called 24K within the Carlson Company that took their gold bond stamps business, which was essentially a loyalty business. And my company was brought in to build the travel component of that. And then my second startup was actually for Intel. And again, it wasn't until much later that I had my own startups where I was the owner. But I built a company within Intel that was their first mobile travel portal. And then we built LasVegas.com for 2 main casino companies. So those were the kinds of things I was working on in the early days. And then my first startup that I was the founder and owner and inventor of the technology was a company called Leisure Logics. And we built a product for the drive market, which you might ask what that is. Well, 89% of all travel in this country is by car. And the rest of the travel industry focuses on the airline industry. And we were focused on really the mass market.
Right. And with that one, do you feel that research and advisory is still or as relevant as it was before with AI tools such as deep research nowadays?
Oh, I think AI is a very interesting conversation to have around the travel industry because I believe 1,000% that AI cannot succeed in the travel industry until the engineers understand that you are not the same person every time you travel. And so unless you can do a multidimensional profile that profiles how you behave under all of the different circumstances, it will never succeed. And most of the people who are dumping money into AI and travel right now are still in the mainstream who focus on the air traveler. They focus on the vacationer and the corporate business traveler. And that's only about 20% of all travel.
What are the rest? What are other profiles? And tell us about their behaviors.
Well, it's really very simple. You do this all of the time. You just don't think about it. So the travel industry focuses, again, on vacation. And the characteristic of vacation is you really don't know where you want to go. You might have a place that you always go, or you're a beach person, or you're a mountain person, or you love river cruises. And you might want to keep doing that same thing. The mainstream travel industry has to inspire you as to what you might like. And AI is actually perfect for that, right? Because they take a look at who you are, what you do, what you read, all those things, and try to suggest things that other people who look like you would do. But here's the thing. When you drive to where you're going, the first thing that changes is who's in the car with you. And so, for instance, I've got 2 children. Well, I call them children. They're adults now. But if they're in the car with me and I want to stop to eat, guaranteed we're having sushi, right? So if I were talking to my in-dash unit in my car and said, I'm hungry, and it was just using AI, it might look at the last 10 meals I had when I was by myself. And now you're recommending things to me as an individual instead of as mom with 2 kids who love sushi, right? And the other thing is even just the amount of time it takes you to get places, Charles, your driving profile when you're by yourself, I guarantee you is different than if you had, grandma and the dog and your family along, right? So driving maybe 4 to 6 hours a day instead of my husband, he travels 12 hours a day, right? And that changes where you need to eat, where you need to sleep. and even your preference of where you like to sleep, right? What kind of hotel do you like to stay in? If you've got young kids, guarantee if it's winter, you're trying to find a place that has an indoor pool, right? When I'm traveling with my husband, we don't care about that at all, right? And so you have to know who you are today, and AI can't know that instinctively. You have to tell it.
Right, right. Or it could detect that your kids are in the car with you, right? Like with their nearby phone, if they have their privacy agreement and so forth. And that would make it better for sure. Tell me about solutions, which is your main one. You've ran that for the past 30 years. So, first question, how does one run a company for 30 years? Is it a lifestyle business? Why didn't you exit that one?
Well, for the first 15 years, it was a consulting firm, which means all you're doing is trading time for money. And if you don't have a book of business where you've got regular income coming from the same clients, there really isn't anything to sell. There isn't anything to exit, because everything had to do with my particular expertise. I'm an expert at marrying buyers and sellers in the travel industry and all the underlying technologies. I've written 4 books. So what people really wanted was my expertise. And I used a model of using 1099 contractors long before anybody realized that that was a good model. Everybody else had staff. And so when you had the downturn at September 11th or the downturn at 2010, they had to lay people off, and I didn't have to do that. But I decided pretty quickly after that, right after my first 15 years of consulting, that I didn't want to trade time for money anymore. And I was tired of giving my ideas to my clients. I really wanted to build something. And so I have been a tech entrepreneur for the last 15 years. So I kept the same company name, Charles, because that's my reputation. Solutions and being a game changer. That's who I am personally. And so the book I wrote and the name of my podcast is The Game Changer.
And most of your startups, have they been funded mostly by your revenue at Solutions, or do you also take investors every time you start a new one?
Well, when I was doing the startups for either my companies that I was working for, obviously that came out of corporate funds, and I had the security of a salary back then. So that was a very different kind of endeavor. But I'll tell you, you learn the same lessons that you do when you go out on your own. But when you go out on your own, all of a sudden you're funding out of your credit cards and maxing out your credit cards, or even your kids' credit cards, right? You're pulling money out of your retirement account, or borrowing from insurance policies, right? Now, if you happen to be fortunate enough to have money in the bank, you're pulling that. But my first venture on my own was Leisure Logics. That was the one just prior to this one. And I raised $7 million. $6 million of that was from an individual investor here in Tampa. And he had a background in private equity, but he was investing as an individual. And then my husband and I put $1 million of our own resources into that venture.
Wow. And what's been the least successful one of all your startups that you started, right, and you funded, and which has been the most successful?
Well, I call Leisure Logics my spectacular failure. And I actually call it my $1 million doctorate, because that was where I got the most valuable education, and where failure became not only teacher, but friend, because you have to be able to make peace with failure. And you have to also be able to isolate what was it that was the failure. Was it the product? In this particular case, it was the method of my investor investing in the company. And you don't hear that very often. We raised $7 million. We needed 10, to be fair. And when he put in the money, he put it in a week at a time. And there is nothing more debilitating to a leadership team than every week having to ask daddy for money. Okay. Now, my current venture, we have only raised friends and family money. This one we have funded with sweat equity, 82,000 hours, which is tantamount to about 8 million that we didn't have to raise.
And tell me about that latest one. Why are you bullish that it will work? Do you have product market fit right now?
We do. We have tested our product in 80 clients in 5 different markets. Again, it's another travel technology venture. But what we have done now is we have trip enabled the Google suite. So you can go into your Google Calendar and with one button can plan travel to any meeting that you have that has a physical address. We have given CRM, calendar, contact management companies the ability to integrate our product directly into their product, which gives them a new revenue stream. And we also donate with every single transaction. So we're giving them a way to leave a legacy as well.
Tell me about the podcast itself. How do you perceive the podcast? What's your strategy behind it?
Well, I have had the podcast for 15 years, and the podcast, I have always interviewed authors. And I do that because I know how very hard it is to write a book and to have it successfully launched. And so authors can use all the help that they can get. And so I've interviewed about 400 authors. And now I simply use the product. I interview all of the CEOs of the companies that become clients of ours. And then I interview people who are really changing the game in the fields of marketing and sales and growth.
Love it. And do some of these people become clients? Do you have a sponsorship or an AdSense money generating strategy?
No, we actually aren't doing the podcast as a money generating element of the company. We just use it to reinforce our thought leadership. And the bulk of the distribution comes through, we post our podcasts on SoundCloud. We've got our own website, thegamechanger.network. But I would say most of the listens actually come through the people that we interview, of them pushing it out. I interviewed Sam Jacobs a couple of weeks ago, and Sam is one of the top people that I follow on LinkedIn. And I don't know how many followers he's got, but it's a lot. And so it's much more effective for me to push my podcast out over Sam's channel than it is on my own.
Thanks for all the value provided today, Chicke. Where can people find out more about you?
Well, the best place is justsolutions.com. And one of the things I'd like to share is we've got a product called the Smart Snapshot, which if you're familiar with Linktree, which allows you to aggregate all of your different links. We've got a competitive product with that. And if you just go to Smart Snapshot on the solution site, you'll see how that product works.
I was Chicke Fitzgerald and